So my name is Dr. Catherine Frogley. I'm a clinical psychologist originally from the UK, and I've been here in Dubai now for coming up 3 years, working at the LightHouse Arabia. For anyone who has not come across us before, we are a mental health and wellness centre in central Dubai, and we're a fantastic resource for anyone out there who is interested in learning more about mental health, about safeguarding your mental health, children's mental health, or indeed are looking for support. And perhaps at the end of the talk, I'll share with you a couple of the things that we have on offer, because it's not just individual therapy. We have lots and lots of support groups and things happening in our community that might be of interest to you. So I'll come back to that at the end. Okay, so I can still see people logging in. We've got lots of people here, which is fantastic. Can I just check everyone can hear me and see me okay? If you can I just ask you to click the raise hand button? Wonderful. I always start by checking we're good. So fantastic. So this is being recorded, so you will have a copy of this in your inbox at some point later today or perhaps early tomorrow morning, with a handout as well. So everything that I'm going to be talking about is in the handout, and you will have a copy of the recording which you can watch again. So please feel free to just sit back and relax, and you can come back to anything at a later time. I will also aim to finish talking at about 2:45, just so we can answer any questions, any comments that you might have towards the end of today's presentation. So just bear with me, pop your questions in there, but I'm not able to answer them until we get to the end of today's session. So just bear with me. Okay, without further ado, I am going to share with you my presentation. So as I mentioned, we are talking through raising resilient children. I'm just going to wait for my computer to load. It seems to be a little bit slow. So I'm going to try and do this from memory. I've done this presentation many times, but just bear with me. But we are going to be talking first of all about children's mental health in general. And then we're going to be talking a little bit about what gets in the way, what stops children from being resilient, and what that low resiliency might look like in a child, how it might affect them. We're going to think a little bit about what does resiliency really mean? How did this term come about? Where does it come from? What do we know about resilience? And then lastly, I'm going to talk you through some of the research and evidence into what we know makes and helps children to be resilient. So my computer does seem to be going rather slowly, so I don't know if you can see this, but it's just taking a bit of time to load. So just bear with me. Unfortunately, I can't see to continue, so just give me a moment whilst it loads up. Sorry about that. Might be because I have some other things open, so let me just, oh my gosh. Okay, bear with me a second. Sorry about this, everyone. It normally works beautifully. So let me just close down some of my other things that are going on in the background, because that might not be helping. Okay. Okay. It's still taking some time. I'm really sorry. Just give me 2 minutes and let's see if we can, I think it will eventually work, but it's just being very, very slow. It's always a little bit rubbish, isn't it, when technology fails us? So apologies while we wait. So the first slide I know is talking a little bit about child and adolescent mental health. So maybe I can talk a little bit about that, what I'm seeing as a clinical psychologist, and what the research tells us is the rates of difficulty in children and adolescents. So we know from the research that 1 in 5 children experience a mental health difficulty or disorder, I should say, a diagnosis, which is very, very high, actually, and perhaps much higher than we might think in our population. The other important thing to note is that this research is based on those children and adolescents who are experiencing some difficulties and who have presented to their doctor, they've got that diagnosis, but we know so many more children do not go to the doctor, do not seek out support. So that number is probably much, much higher. And in addition to that, we know that the pandemic is also causing many, many difficulties for lots of children. And this may mean that our rates of mental health disorder and difficulty amongst our young population is actually a lot higher than it will have been. And I think that's the same for adults as well. I'm working with adults and children, and I know that this pandemic has had a really, really big impact on many people in many different ways. And I will say for my teens, I think the thing that I'm seeing a lot of young people struggle with is loneliness and feeling quite disconnected from their peers. It's been, an unbearable year in terms of not being able to spend time with their friends in the same way, not being able to go into school for some people, having to be socially distanced from their peers at school. It's actually unthinkable when I know that adolescents' whole purpose at that stage of life is to form social networks, is to spend time with their peers. So this is a really, really difficult thing for them to go through. And I think in younger children, they're experiencing a lot of anxiety, a lot of separation anxiety, a lot of hypervigilance related to living in a world where there's this invisible danger present all around them, i.e. COVID. And they're seeing a lot of people also struggle with those things as well. So my computer continues to not work. So bear with me. I'm a little bit confused. Someone has made a comment in the, I'm not really sure. So bear with me. I'm not quite sure what's happening. Sorry, bear with me one moment because I would like to share the slides with you. I think they help. But if I can't, then I will have to do it without the slides. Sorry about this, everyone. This has not happened before. Let me see if I can share this one. Okay, I might have to just, my computer seems to be having a little bit of a fit right now. Oh dear. So I can't, it's all frozen. I'm really sorry. This is me having to be resilient, isn't it? I'm showing you all right now. I think it might be the new system that's on my computer is just not playing ball because it's just loading. Bear with me. Okay, let's give it a few more minutes. I'm just trying to be patient, but I can't even see the slide, which will help me to talk through the different aspects of what I wanted to share with you. Apologies. Oh, okay. Can everyone see that? Now it's all happening at once. Fantastic. Let me just see what the questions are. Thank you, everyone. Okay, resilience in practice. Thank you. Everyone's being so sweet, bearing with me. Okay, it came up, didn't it? And then it's gone away again. So come on. Let's press play. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. Oh dear. Okay, so I'll just continue talking about child and adolescent mental health whilst I'm waiting for it to load. I think it loaded and then it's crashed again, so apologies. So we know, so in addition to 1 in 5, we know that 1 in 4 students or young people struggle with a mental health difficulty before the age of 14, and 3/4 of them by their mid-20s. So we know that mental health typically starts at that young age. And so as clinical psychologists, it's really important for us to try and share with parents and with teachers the importance of thinking about mental health as young as you can, really, because the better we can support young people to develop strategies around their mental health, the much more likely they are to develop that resilience and are less likely to need support later on in life. We also know that young people face a lot of stigma and isolation and discrimination when it comes to mental health. So they're often a lot less likely to reach out for support, to talk to even their parents, but definitely to their teachers, or to go to a session with a psychologist or a counsellor. That can be really, really hard. And we also know, very sadly, that suicide is the second leading cause of death amongst 15 to 29-year-olds, which is such a huge number and quite scary, really, that people, young people experience such an overwhelming difficulty with their mental health that they might even contemplate suicide, which is very, very sad. So when we're thinking about resilience, of course, it's connected to mental health. So the reason that we're talking about resilience today is really we want to help young people be successful and get through life in the best way that they can. But we also want them to be able to manage their emotions such that they develop that resilience and they're able to go through life and deal with hardship, deal with adversity in the best way that they can. And we know that resilience is one of the key ingredients that helps young people to be able to deal with adversity and resilience and difficulties. So the word resilio comes from the Latin term to bounce back. So when we're thinking about resilience, really we're thinking about how do we help people to bounce back from difficult moments. Because as much as we as parents or people supporting young people might want to protect young children from difficult things happening in their life, unfortunately, things will come up in life that are difficult. They will be moments where they fail, where they make mistakes. Perhaps they even go through something traumatic that's beyond our control as parents wanting to support children. So rather than trying to, eliminate any of the dangers, any of the adversities that they might encounter as a young person, what we want to do instead is equip them to learn how they can cope with that resilience, how they can cope, with that difficulty, with that adversity that might show up in their life. And actually, I think of this a little bit like a vaccine. Oh, it comes and it goes. Okay, I'm actually going to have to give up, I'm afraid, on sharing the slides, but we will share them with you afterwards in an email instead. I'm going to do it from my presentation because otherwise I'll never get through it, will I? So as I mentioned, so I was just saying that resiliency is actually a little bit like developing immunity. So a bit like a vaccine, we need a little bit of the germs or the virus, let's say, to help us to build tolerance around that virus. And I think that's the same when it comes to our difficult emotions, for example, or hardship. We need to face hard times a little bit in a safe way with the support of other people to be able to build our resilience around it, to be able to tolerate that in future and to know how to cope with it when it comes to us in our adult lives. So this is how I like to see building resilience in young people. So what do I mean by resilience? What is it made up of? What does it include? What are we really talking about when it comes to resilience? So some things that we're thinking about is the idea of having a realistic, optimistic view on the world. So that is not about being always positive, which I think sometimes children are given that message that we should be positive all of the time. I think we as adults are given that message a lot in the media, on social media. And we're going to come back to that idea of toxic positivity and how it might affect us. But there is a realistic optimism that we know, as is captured by the research, which helps young children and indeed adults as well to be resilient. To have optimism, but to also be realistic is very important. To be able to face fears is really important. To have a moral compass, so to know internally, what we believe is moral or right or wrong in the world, what is ethical, what is not. And this is something that children start to develop at quite a young age, and it evolves through time. We initially start by accepting what is told to us by our parents, this is what is right or wrong, and then we start to kind of challenge that, explore that a little bit more in our teenage years, and we develop our own sense of what is right and wrong. Resiliency definitely includes things like religion and spirituality, our connection to this kind of higher being sometimes. Having social support is really important, and it's not just having that support, but it's also being able to accept help from people. This is something that we forget sometimes when we think about resilience. We often think about resilience as being, persevering and pushing through difficult times. That's part of it, but it's also knowing that there is a stopping point where actually it's really important to be able to say, I need help, and I'm willing to ask for that help, and I'm willing to accept that help, because as humans, we need help from time to time. We don't know it all, and we shouldn't be expected to. It definitely includes having resilient role models. So who in our life do we look to for support? How do other people in our life build resilience? That's very important. So you as parents, which I'm sure most of you are, will be thinking about your own resilience and how that impacts your children and what they're seeing. Physical fitness is definitely part of resilience. We know now that physical fitness and exercise has a huge benefit on our mental well-being as well as our physical body. And we also know that there is a very, very strong connection between our mind and our body. And if one of those things is out of sync, then it's going to impact the other. So if our mind is not well, our body will feel that. And if our body is not well, our mind is going to feel that. And that brings me on to the next point, which is this idea of brain fitness. So our brain is a muscle, it's something that we have to use it or lose it, as we say, in terms of the connections that we build. So if we want to build resilience, we have to build that mental fitness, and we have to practice. Just like if we're going to the gym to build our physical muscles, we can't expect that to happen overnight. We have to put in work, we have to maintain that, and we have to see those changes developing through time. This is a really important one. It's cognitive and emotional flexibility, or sometimes we lump this together as psychological flexibility, and that's being able to think around different problems, not be too rigid, not be too stuck in our own thoughts, our own ideas, but being agile, being flexible helps us to be able to deal with changes that arise, things that come up in our life that we might need to adjust and shift around. And that also helps us to be open to others and able to be open to kind of considering other people's perspectives, which helps us to think about our own perspective, but it also helps us to build good, strong relationships too. And having meaning and purpose is absolutely very important in life. And I think when I find people who are struggling with that sense of meaning and purpose, that can be a really difficult thing to go through. So having that sense of meaning and purpose is also part of resilience. So low resilience can look like many things. I've mentioned child and adolescent mental health at the beginning, which is why this topic is so important. But having low resilience can affect children in many different ways. So of course, it causes a vulnerability to mental health difficulties. But it also may just mean that they struggle. They may not necessarily have a mental health disorder, but they may struggle to tolerate different aspects of life. They might be more emotional, more moody. They might withdraw quite easily. They might become defiant, or they might engage in risky behavior that they haven't really thought through. They might be quite angry and resentful, or on the other side of that, they might be quite clingy and not want to kind of go out into the world as an independent young adult. They might be quite fearful of doing that. They might struggle to do that. And I'll come on to some examples of children who've left for university and who have really found that very hard if they've not built their resilience up until that point. They might have trouble sleeping. They may also struggle academically. That's a big one that's perhaps you might be seeing now or at a later point in life. So why are our children less resilient right now? I think there's many different reasons for this. I think we've gone from parenting, you know, if I think about the way that my mum speaks about how her childhood was and what her parenting was like, she always talks about, you know, it was, you know, children were to be seen and not heard. This idea, I don't know if that's a British thing, but this idea that, you know, you had to be quite tough as a child. You weren't really listened to, maybe necessarily. You were expected to kind of get on with things. You weren't expected to be, you know, emotional about things. This kind of stiff upper lip, which is perhaps a bit British, but I think also is a generational thing, was how she was raised. And she finds it interesting that now we're kind of very aware of how children are feeling, and we're very kind of mindful of that, and very fearful perhaps of doing a bad job as parents. And that sometimes can be healthy, but sometimes we can go too far. So this idea of bubble wrapping children and wanting to protect them from all these dangers that we are now aware of that children go through in life might be something that is actually meaning that we're not allowing children some independence. We're not allowing them to experience some difficult moments for them to grow through and learn from. So it's almost like there's a pendulum that was swung one way and it's kind of gone the other way sometimes. And we're now very aware of how we can affect our children and the impact of the environment on them. But perhaps we're struggling now to come back to center where it's okay for them to have a bit of difficulty, as long as we're there to support them through that. In fact, it's healthy, it's helpful to have a bit of adversity within reason. And in fact, you know, people can go through really, really adverse, difficult things and come out really, really resilient. So it's not actually about it's not necessarily about what that person goes through. It's actually about how they're supported, their social support, and it's the way that they interpret the things that happen to them. So sometimes there's that bubble wrapping. We want to protect children. We don't want them to feel difficult feelings. We don't want them to experience setbacks. And that may mean that as parents, we're kind of, we're micromanaging, we're on top of them, we're kind of helicopter parenting a little bit, where we're trying to kind of help them at every moment. And that sometimes means that they're not having that experience. We sometimes as parents might feel that their problem is our problem. So we take on some of those feelings that they might be experiencing, and therefore we kind of feel it in a similar way to them. There is this sense sometimes of entitlement that we see in our young children, because we really want them to, feel empowered, that, there are certain things in life that if they want them, they have the ability to go out and get them. And sometimes too much of them being kind of the center of a parent's universe sometimes means that they develop a sense of entitlement, that I should have these things, I should have access to them. And unfortunately, in life, that may not be the case. And we have to prepare them for that and help them through that when they do experience things not going their way. I mentioned before that there's this idea of toxic positivity sometimes in our culture right now, where we're very focused on mental health and we're very focused on happiness and being happy. And sometimes, I'm all for people being aware of mental health, and I'm a big fan of the fact that This is now something that is talked about much more consistently in society, in the media. However, sometimes we can take that too far, and we can kind of almost force positivity on people and make people feel that they're abnormal if they don't feel happy. When in actual fact, it's really normal to experience the full range of emotions. We're going to feel angry, we're going to feel jealous, we're going to feel sad. We cannot be happy all the time. That's impossible. And I think sometimes we really struggle with that. And I think things like social media, where we're showing our best selves and we're looking at everybody else's best self, it's hard to remember that there are naturally going to be times where it doesn't look so good. And that's okay. That doesn't mean you're living an unfulfilled life. It's just the fact of life is that it can't be positive all of the time. So every day, you know, there will be good and bad things that happen. And obviously our mindset, we want to, you know, think about how we manage and interpret those things, but denying those difficult feelings is not healthy. And actually, if we do that for our children, if we don't allow children to cry, if we don't allow children to feel jealous or angry or sad, they're never going to learn how to deal with those emotions in their adult life. So a bit like the immunity analogy I spoke about earlier, actually children have to feel these emotions, and we have to allow them to feel those emotions for them to really know how it is that they can navigate through them. But so often our natural response when we see a child in distress is to say, don't cry, don't be sad, you know, distract them, point them towards something positive. And actually we're doing them a disservice when we do that. And I know it's really natural, but we're doing them a disservice. We're not helping them to feel their feelings and learn that it's okay to feel sad, you know, to name it and say, you feel really disappointed right now because so and so has stolen your toy and you really wanted to play with it. And it's okay to feel upset about that, and allow them to feel that before we then move them on to the next thing or try and help them to feel a bit happier. And lastly, children are less resilient because there is so much pressure on our young people in this generation. And that comes from the academic pressure that they're under. I think particularly in Dubai, I'm speaking only from my experience of being in the UK and coming to Dubai, but the pressure that they face here because the schools are wonderful, but everybody's it's doing so many extracurricular activities. They're thinking about colleges way before I was. They're really spending a lot of time doing their work in a way that I never did as a child. And I was a high achiever, but the level of pressure that I see young people going through right now is way beyond what I experienced as a child. And on top of that, I think the peer pressure that they experience is also much greater than I did because of this age of social media, because of the internet, because you can connect with people all the time. You leave school, and you can connect to them. You can face bullying in your home through social media, etc. There's just a lot more pressure on young people. And also with all of these perfected images and lives that we see on social media, it gives this impression that you're not worthy if you're not, you know, traveling to the most beautiful places every 5 minutes, or if you're not got the perfect body, or if you haven't got the latest sneakers, or if you're not kind of looking beautifully glam all the time on your TikTok account. You know, there's so much pressure that young people face right now that is above and beyond what I faced as a young person, and possibly what you faced as well. So just to recap, the reasons why children are not resilient in this generation is for many reasons, partly because of that pressure we just spoke about, partly because there is this idea of positive thinking and happiness that is at the forefront of our society at the moment, perhaps a sense of entitlement that we might be contributing to for children, taking their problems as our problems, feeling very emotionally affected by their failures, their difficulties, you know, not having that separation that they are their own person and we are our own person. We sometimes see our children as projects that we are responsible for, and that sometimes is not always a healthy way to parent. And also this idea of bubble wrapping children, wanting to wrap them up. And trust me, I know that feeling. I'm saying this is not me blaming you. I know that feeling of wanting to protect children, to stop them from feeling certain things, because it's hard to see them struggle. It really, really is. So let's think about your role in raising resilient children. And for this section, I'm going to talk about some research that was done. It was the International Resilience Research Project in America. It was a study that surveyed more than 1,200 families and children from over, I think it was 27 sites, and it was across 22 countries. So it was a very large scale study as psychology goes, and it was multicultural, multi-country, which sometimes we struggle with that in psychology. We often stick to one population. So it's looking at what is resilience across multiple populations, multiple cultures, to help us think about what we might need to do as parents to support them in that. So I'm going to share with you 15 elements of resilience that this research uncovered. Okay, and it's lumped into I have, I can, and I am. Okay, so it's the things that we have in our life, the things that we have access to. It's the belief that I am, is how that young person views themselves. And it's the I can, it's the things that we can do to support us. So these are the 15 elements of resilience. So when it comes to I have, it's about relationships. And as I said earlier in this talk, we are human beings and we need people. Nobody lives in isolation, and those people that do live in isolation are found to struggle with a variety of different mental health and physical health difficulties. We know that relationships is one of the biggest things that contributes to overall happiness in our life. One of my favorite research studies looked at, a generation of men over 70 years, which is a very long-term study in psychology, and it measured many, many things like money, success, how many children they had, whether they were in a relationship, whether they got divorced, whether they were married, their age, their health, as many things as you can think of to look at what makes people happy. This research aimed to uncover. And what they found was the biggest predictor of happiness was whether people felt that they had meaningful, quality relationships in their life. And not only did that mean that people were much more likely to report happiness, but they were also more likely to have better physical health outcomes. They were much more likely to live longer, and were much less likely to suffer from mental health difficulties too. So it has a physical and a mental health effect to have good, meaningful relationships. So the I have is really about relationships. So I have people around me that I trust, who love me no matter what. So we call this unconditional love in psychology, and it is the basis of a good, secure foundation, a secure attachment. And attachment, as psychologists, is the thread through which many factors of resilience, strength, a positive self-esteem runs through. So having people in your life that love you, even when you mess up, even when you're angry, even when you're your worst self, that knowing that is incredibly important to have resilience. So people who set limits for me, so I know when to stop before the danger or trouble. So limit setting with your child, and I mean by setting boundaries with them, setting rules for them. This is another factor of resilience that's really important, because young people need to know that there is a containment, there is a safety, there is boundaries around them. They're not yet in a place where they can set those things for themselves. They need us as parents to do that for them. And of course, this will be tighter when they're younger, and as they get to adolescence, you can start to be a bit more flexible, but you still need those limits. You still need those non-negotiables as well. So setting limits for children is a very important factor. So to have people who show me how to do things right before, show me the way to do things, so that I know how to do things. So that's positive role modeling is what I'm trying to say there. So it's having people in our life that show us the way, because children, will do they will do as they see us doing, not as we tell them to do. So if we're shouting at our child, don't shout, what they're seeing is you shouting. So they are not going to be able to, that really doesn't feel like a rule for them. They need to see that you can be calm, or that if you do shout, that you come back to them and you say, I'm sorry I shouted. A rule in our house is no shouting. So just being mindful of how you role model yourself to your child is also going to be really important. And I know that feels a little bit scary as parents, that they're watching us and they're being affected by our behaviors. But if we're mindful of that, that can have a huge amount of positivity for them. And it doesn't mean you can't make mistakes. In fact, when we're talking about resilience, it's about you owning your mistakes and sharing it with them and letting them know, look, mommy makes mistakes too. I messed up here. This is how I'm going to make it right. I'm going to apologize. I'm going to, take 5 minutes to cool down, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about this. So it's not about being a perfect parent. It's about being a parent who thinks about how they model themselves to their child and how they communicate that with them. Another element, so the fourth element is I have people around me who want me to learn things and do them on my own. So helping young people to have a positive self-esteem is often about letting them do things. And again, I'll hold my hands up. I do this with children sometimes. It's tempting to want to show them how to do it all the time and not let them try for themselves first, because sometimes, it's quicker for us to just show them how to do it. But actually having that personal initiative is really important. They need to be within reason, maybe not for everything, but sometimes we want to give them opportunities to do things for themselves and to make mistakes, and ask for our help when they need it. Number 5 is people who help me when I'm stuck, in danger, or need to learn. So that's having people around them that are caring, that are involved, that help them in those difficult moments, to think about how they can get through that difficult moment, to know that they're seen, they're heard, there's that unconditional love once again. Okay, so these are the elements of I have. So it's about trust and love, limit setting, being a positive role model, or having positive role models for your child, giving them personal initiative, and having caring and involved people in their life. And that doesn't have to just be you. That can be grandparents, friends of family, teachers, therapists, even, other people in their life that are caring, are involved, and support them during difficult times. So then we move on to the second aspect, which is I am. So these are the beliefs. This is another element of resilience. It's the belief this child has about themselves. So we're talking about self-esteem here. We're talking about how that child sees themselves. And so much of my work with adults and teens is looking at how they see themselves and what may have contributed to them perhaps seeing themselves in a negative light or in a difficult light. So we want, another aspect of resilience is we want them to believe that they're likable and lovable as a person. We want them to believe that we want them to know that, have that belief that they are able to do nice things for other people, to show empathy to other people. So we need to model and help them to develop that empathy. We want to be respectful of ourselves and others. We're willing to be responsible and take responsibility for things that we do, and that could be good things and bad things. And we want to have a confidence that things will generally be okay. Of course, we cannot assume that everything will always be okay, but we have a confidence that for the most part, things are okay. we're coming on to the next section, which is I can. So these 5 elements are about things that children can do. So we want them to be able to talk to other people. We want them to be able to seek help, as I said. We want them to consult others when they're going through something, not to keep it all to themselves. We want to help them to problem solve, to find and solve problems independently or in groups or with parents. We want them to feel that they can have some element of self-control, the ability to control myself positively over time, and feel like I've got strategies for how to do that. I want to be able to learn that I can make good decisions. You know, I've got the tools, I've got the support around, you know, thinking through decision making and how to do that. And lastly, how to seek help, as I mentioned before. Okay. So I'm going to read this quote by Paul Tough, who's wrote an excellent book about raising resilient children, because I think it captures the contradictions in doing this work sometimes as parents. So it is a central paradox of contemporary parenting. In fact, we have an acute, almost biological impulse to provide for our children, to give them everything they want and need, to protect them from dangers and discomforts, both large and small. And yet we all know on some level that what kids need more than anything is a little hardship, some challenge, some deprivation that they can overcome, even if just to prove to themselves that they can. And I think that just captures some of what we've spoken about so far, in terms of we want to protect them from everything, and yet we know they need to do certain things for themselves. They need a little bit of that challenge to grow. So I'm just mindful of our time, but I'm going to keep going a little bit more, just to think about how you can help kids foster some of this I have, I can, I am. Okay. So I just want to also address this idea of, if you're a working parent here today, or if you're a parent in general, these things also apply. But it's not something, parenting is not something you can do alone. You know, you also need your social support. You need your tribe, your people to help you in difficult moments, just as you're trying to teach your child to do that too. So don't feel that you have to do it all on your own. You also need your support system. And to be able to teach resilience to your children, you also have to be resilient. And as I said, part of that is about you knowing when you need support and reaching for that support and developing those people around you that help you to feel loved unconditionally, and to talk through challenges when it comes to parenting. So there's a lot of guilt, I think, that parents experience. You're either, you often, it's hard both ways. You're either a stay-at-home mum and you experience guilt about that, or there's judgment about that, or you're a parent who works, and that there's also guilt that comes with that, being away from your children. We can't win. So just be mindful of that guilt and how it affects you, because it does consume a lot of energy. And actually, in both situations, it can be really, really challenging. So I think one of the most important things is thinking about quality time, and knowing that quality time doesn't have to be perfect. It can be any time. It can be the time that you spend with your child on the way to school. And it's the way that you interact with that child in that moment. And it's giving them, the opportunity to talk to you. It's being really mindful of the conversations that you have with them. It doesn't have to be, I'm setting aside, hours of an evening with my child. It can be anywhere, and it can be small pockets of moments. It doesn't have to be perfect, but quality time is really important, where you're putting all your distractions away and you're getting into their mind, and you're exploring with them, you're listening to them, you're really trying to support them. And I guess it's also knowing, and this comes into the research we know around grit. And it's about kind of thinking about our expectations for ourselves and for our children as not about being perfect and striving relentlessly for unrelenting standards. It's striving for the best, but it's not striving for that perfection, and just knowing that we're not going to be good at everything, and nor are our children. We're just trying to do the best that we can, because sometimes, you know, in that striving for unrelenting standards, this is what breeds perfectionism and that over focus on achievement, and that causes anxiety. It causes a lot of joyless kind of anxious pursuit. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't teach kids to do things because this is what they really want. It teaches them to do things because they're motivated by fear of failing and achievement. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do with your children. So I am, I have, I can, all of these principles that I talked about have to be taught to children. We have to teach them how to encounter distress. We have to teach them what to expect in life, and we have to build their skill sets for tolerating difficult moments and distress. We have to cultivate optimism, curiosity, and other cognitive skills. And we have to cultivate their ability to self-soothe, to look after their emotional well-being, and that meaning and purpose that we spoke about. So emotion regulation strategies are something that I spend the majority of my career teaching adults, teaching children. How do we encounter our emotions is such a huge skill that if we haven't been given the foundation tools for this as a child, we're really going to struggle in our adult lives. So just knowing, you know, what is it that I'm experiencing? What is the name for that? How do I regulate these emotions? Is one of those essential skills that can really help children be successful emotionally and academically later in life. We used to call these the soft skills. We used to think, you know, IQ and academia was much more important. We now know that EQ, or emotional intelligence, is actually way more of a much more predictor of success. Because if you're better with people, if you're able to manage your emotions, to cope with stress, then you're going to be more successful than if you're just very, very clever and you can absorb information really well, but you're overwhelmed by it, or you don't know how to work with people. So we can do many things around emotion regulation strategies. Mindfulness is a great one. Soothing with our 5 senses is another one. Teaching children how to be empathic to their emotions, how to talk about their emotions, is a really fantastic way to help build that emotion regulation strategies. And there are loads of resources out there now, but of course, also within the work that I do with children, there is lots of ways in which this can be taught to children as well. So some things you can do, some things to think about is sharing, you know, perhaps at the dinner table, or perhaps in moments, you know, positive things that have happened each, you know, in your week, and really dwelling on them and thinking about those things together. That can be really useful. An exercise I like to give children is to talk about, you know, 3 things that have gone well, and maybe a couple of things that haven't gone so well this week. So you're getting them to name their emotions and their experiences. Having risks, taking risks, and to fail and sharing with children is also another way in which you can be a positive role model. So you can share with them when you've made mistakes. Another resiliency exercise is sharing a risk that you've taken, either one that went well or one that didn't go so well, what you learned about it. Having these conversations with children can really help them learn from you, but also thinking about how you allow them to make mistakes in safe ways. So of course, there are certain things we're not going to let them do. We're not going to let them cross the road on their own and take a risk there if we don't feel they're safe, because that's too dangerous. But there might be smaller things where we can give them a little bit of flexibility. We can allow them to try and fail, even if we think, oh, this is probably not going to go so well. There might be opportunities there for them to learn and grow through it. So thinking about that, thinking about how we can give them those safe opportunities and to help them bounce back from it. You know, sometimes I hear parents talking about their child not giving in their homework, and so they feel like they need to be on top of it, reminding them all the time to do their homework. Now, at certain ages and stages, that's appropriate because that child is not yet able to organize themselves to do their homework. But there comes an age where actually we want to teach them to be organized. And so actually, I sometimes say to parents, you know, what would happen if they didn't hand in their homework? they're going to get told off by their teacher, they're going to have a detention. Okay, can we allow that to happen so that this child learns by a natural consequence rather than us telling them what is going to happen? And, you know, sometimes that child is able to do their homework because they learn, you know, I can do this by myself and I don't want to get into detention. But sometimes they do get into detention. As long as it's not a huge risk that we're taking, sometimes that can really help them to learn how to organize themselves independently. Of course, this is dependent on the developmental age and stage of your child, but something along those lines is something I help parents to think about. Having meaning and focused is really important. So sometimes I think we as parents can sometimes be very focused on achievement, and we forget to connect what we're doing at school to meaning. And I see this so much with my teenage clients. They're really struggling with that sense of meaning. You know, why am I going to school? Why am I learning maths? Why am I doing all of this work? You know, I don't want to be a mathematician. I don't want to use this in the future. So it is really important to connect what they're doing now to something that gives them a sense of meaning and purpose. And that will be different for different children. It's not enough just to do for doing's sake, just to impress our parents. We need to have context, we need to have a sense of purpose, we need to have a sense of meaning. We're much more likely to persevere and stick it out if we have a personal meaning behind what we're doing. And that's why, you know, connecting to meaning is really important. So again, an exercise you can do with your children is get them talking about what contributions they want to make in the world. What do they see themselves doing? What would they like to do? A question I like to ask people in general is, you know, when they're a grandparent, when they're kind of 80 years old and they look back on their life, what would they like to have achieved? What would they like people to say about them? That for an older child really helps them to kind of think about, what kind of person do I want to be? Helps us as adults to think about that too. So again, with I can and I have, it's recognizing that struggle is inevitable. It is to be expected. There will be moments in life that are not easy, that are difficult, and it's navigating through that. And an exercise I like to do with young children sometimes is to get them to identify someone in their life or a celebrity who they think has been through something difficult, and interviewing them, asking them questions about how they got through that, what was the hardest part of it, when was the time when you knew you'd got through it, you know, helping them to really think with that person and learn from that person about difficult moments. And that could be with a parent, it could be a celebrity kind of doing some research, but you can have some really interesting conversations with children around this topic, just to help them think about, how do I cope with adversity? Tolerating discomfort is also something we can help children to learn. Again, it's a natural part of the learning process. We can help them to experience difficult emotions, that they can learn from them. Again, part of this, I think, is really important, to sit with difficult feelings, not to just push them aside, distract or numb, but be able to sit with children as they feel disappointed, or to sit with them when they feel jealous of their sibling or they feel angry about something, and just putting aside how we feel about their anger and just letting them express that and helping them to understand that. And you can ask them, you know, again, an exercise for you is, what's the hard part about that? You know, and how do we take a step away from this now? You know, what's difficult about this? Helping them to understand that is also really important. Okay, so again, I'm just going to finish with a quote here that comes from Mr. Paul Tough again. And for anyone interested, he's written a really fantastic book about raising resilient children. It's fantastic. It encompasses a lot of research that I've spoken about today. But he says, in the end, though, this research had a surprising effect. It made me more relaxed as a parent. When Ellington was born, I was very much caught up in the idea of childhood as a race. The faster a child develops skills, the better he does on tests, the better he'll do in life. Having done this reporting, I'm less concerned about my son's reading and counting ability. Don't get me wrong, I still want him to know that stuff, but I think he'll get there in time. What I'm more concerned about in this is his character, or whatever this right synonym is for character when you're talking about a 3-year-old. I want him to be able to get over disappointments, to calm himself down, to keep working at a puzzle, even if it's frustrating, to be good at sharing, to feel loved and confident and a full sense of belonging. Most importantly, I want him to be able to deal with failure. That's a difficult thing for parents to give their children, since we have deep in our DNA the urge to shield our kids from every kind of trouble. But what we're finding out now is that trying to protect our children, we may actually be harming them. By not giving them the chance to learn to manage adversity, to cope with failure, we produce kids who have real problems when they grow up. Overcoming adversity is what produces character, and character, even more than IQ, is what leads to real and lasting success. Okay, so I can see a few questions. So someone has asked they would like to see the presentation. I'm so sorry. What I might do is ask if I can share a previous recording with you as well, which has the presentation. But we will definitely share the recording of what I've said today, but apologies that it's been a little bit difficult. Someone said Mercury in retrograde effect. Definitely. So you could see my slides. Could you? It's a bit confusing. So someone has asked, sometimes my child doesn't want to obey. What are the positive ways to convince them? Which I think is a fantastic question. And children will not always do what we ask them to do. And rather than us trying to get into that power struggle of trying to get them to do what we want and obey, what's more effective, I find, is trying to understand them. Why don't they want to do it? What's the feeling behind why they don't want to do something? So if we can put down our need to be in control and to have that power in that moment, if we can put down the rope, if you like, and really understand, okay, it looks to me like you really don't want to do that. I wonder why you don't want to do that. I wonder if you're feeling angry at me for asking you to do that, or I wonder if you feel really disappointed that you don't want to leave the park. Just really naming with them what it is that they feel and allowing them to feel that and showing that you understand that and you have empathy for that is much more likely to help that young person to move to where you need them to be, because they'll feel understood and that will bring down some of the emotion that they're feeling. I've got lots of thank you. So someone has asked another great question. So what do we do when sometimes there's no meaning behind things that need to be done? Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because you're right. Sometimes we can find meaning, and I would always strive to find, why are we doing something? Because often there is meaning behind it. It's just, it's just sometimes hard. It's not obvious what that meaning is. So there might be things that we're doing at school that right now don't feel meaningful, but what's the purpose of school? What is it that you want in life? Why do you have to have these qualifications, etc.? But sometimes we have to do stuff that, we just have to do it, and it's not fun stuff. And again, I think that comes back to, helping young people to understand, to meet them where they're at, and to say, look, I really understand you don't want to do this. I don't want to do things sometimes. And you can share examples. I don't want to load the dishwasher, but sometimes, in order to have a nice clean house, we have to load the dishwasher. So helping them to know that it's okay to feel frustrated, it's okay that they don't want to do these things, but we have to find a way to do hard things sometimes, things that don't bring us a huge amount of meaning and purpose in that moment. Okay, unfortunately, I'm really sorry, but I have to go because I know I have a client now. I'm ever so sorry that, that the beginning of the presentation was a bit rocky, and I had to share my own resilience here. Thank you for staying with me. I can actually see over 100 of you stuck with me through that. I think I had 120 people who stayed with me, even though my presentation wouldn't actually load. So thank you for bearing with me. And I will ensure that you have this presentation without the slides sent to you, but I'll also ask Kisra to send you another version of this talk where I do share the slides so you can see the slides as well. Apologies, and thank you again for joining me today and for all your questions. If you do have any questions that I haven't answered, please go to our Lighthearted Parenting page on Instagram and DM those questions there. We will get back to you. Or you can also go to the general LightHouse Arabia page as well, and we will answer any of those questions, or you can email us at our general reception email, and we will try and get back to you with any questions that I wasn't able to answer today. I would love to stay a bit longer, but I know I've got people waiting now for me on Zoom, so I best go. But thank you so much. Take care, and all the best.